Hello friends, welcome back to Heartscapes, where we're learning the system of Reiki to live lives that are grounded, spacious, connected, and that help us remember ourselves. This is Editing Michaela popping in here on the front end of this video, just to share a little bit of an orientation, because this is a video that I chose to split into two parts, just for ease of engagement. So I just wanted to kind of remind you what we're up to here before dropping you right back into the middle of that video. So the last one, which was released last Wednesday, I'll put the link down below so that you can get caught up if you like, oriented us to the question of how do we navigate challenging transitions and change in our life? How do we move through liminal space in ways that are generative and life-affirming rather than just plain stressful, challenging, and goal-oriented, where we just want to get to the other side of the change as quickly as possible. This is a topic that comes up in my work all the time, and that has come up in my life over and over again. And it's actually something I consider essential life skills, but that I don't see talked about in this particular way in very many spaces. So I really wanted to give it just a little bit more space on this channel. And in sharing this with you, I wanted to draw on metaphors and kind of lived experience in the natural world, with nature as our greatest and best teacher for how to be an animal in this world, how to navigate our lives. So I'm going to drop you back into that video in a minute. We'll be in a beautiful meadow at Harbin Hot Springs. And in the first video, I just kind of gave you the context of why this is an important topic to think about, how we might want to think about change and transition and making the most of the liminal space while we are inside of it. In this second part, we're going to look at specific examples. So I'll walk you through some specific phenomena in nature that we can look to help inform how we might think about our own experience of liminal space, and I'll use examples from my own life. So that's where we're going to head in this video. And I just wanted to take one more pause here on the front end to do something that I'm not always really great about emphasizing here on the old YouTubes, which is to invite you to subscribe to this channel if you like what you are seeing here. Our channel is just a hop, skip, and a jump away from 1,000 subscribers, which is, here on YouTube is kind of the first major milestone for our channel, and I'm really excited to get there with you. This is a platform that thrives on engagement, and so the more that people who appreciate this content can engage with it in some way, to like, to subscribe, to comment, to share it around, then the more YouTube recognizes this as something that has value and will show it to you more often and to others who travel the ye old YouTube. So this is just my invitation and request. If you like what you see, hit that subscribe button down below and join us on this journey as we continue moving forward. Alrighty, so now I'm going to drop you right back into the middle of a gorgeous meadow at Harbin Hot Springs in Northern California on an absolutely glorious late winter's day as we look to nature as our greatest and first teacher on how to navigate change and transition in our life. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think. See you later. Bye-bye. And so I wanted to just share 3 specific insights that I have noticed while I've been out here in these musings, specific lessons from nature about how to be in liminal space. And these are going to be examples that are not going to be applicable to every situation. I'm going to use examples from my own life. There are many, many, many more. There's lots of depth that we could go into here, but I just wanted to kind of focus on 3 examples to help us see the way in which observing nature, being in nature can help us, can support us in this question. Sound good? Okay. So there's 3 types of natural transitions that I've encountered over the last couple of days that I want to use as this example. The transition from nighttime to daytime, which we would call dawn. The transition from meadow to stream, so that edge place between the meadow and the water. And the transition from sunshiny places to shady places. Okay? So those are the three spaces that we are going to observe. So while I'm sitting here on the edge of this meadow, let's start with talking about dawn, the transition from night to day. It is no longer dawn. It's about 10:30 in the morning, so the sun is fairly high. So we'll just imagine that over there in the east, the sky is beginning to turn red. You can start to see the shadows of the clouds in front of the sky. There's that white yellow glow beginning to come up from behind the mountains. And very slowly, as you look across the hills, there's these shafts of light that start to illuminate the hillsides, start to reveal things that you could not see just a half an hour earlier when it was still proper nighttime. You can't see everything yet. There's still deep shadows in many places. The places where the light is, it's still soft and hazy. You can't quite see what's there, but you can see something is becoming revealed. Perhaps you have just recently woken up and your body is feeling kind of stiff from sleep, but you're starting to move, you're starting to flex, you're starting to come awake, but you still have some little tendrils of dream from your sleep that are still present with you. These are some of the elements, some of the magical parts about dawn. We have this liminal space where it's no longer nighttime and it's not yet daytime. And what happens in those spaces? Things begin to be revealed that you couldn't see before. But again, they're not quite in their full form. They're still kind of hazy. And that activates our imagination, right? Because when we can see we've got just a little bit of information, but we don't have the whole picture, our imagination starts to fill in those gaps. We start to see things that perhaps even aren't there, but that are coming through this alchemy, this relationship between our imagination and what is actually present in the world. Those dreams that were with us in the nighttime, when we were in them, they were absolute reality, right? When we were asleep and we were in our dreams, that dream just was what it was. It was real. When we're fully awake going about our day, maybe we don't even remember our dreams at all. Certainly, we might look at them and go, well, that was weird. That wasn't reality at all. But in this liminal space of dawn time, when we've just woken up, those dreams might still be present, maybe just little tendrils of them. And oftentimes, those tendrils can inform how we begin to think about the day. So there's this, again, this alchemy between our imagination and the reality of our waking day. So when I was thinking about what kind of transition this liminal space of the dawn reminded me of, what came to mind was my transition out of my 9-to-5 job at a university that I had worked for 15 years and my time into running my own business, Heartscapes. This was a liminal time that had an element of intention and an element of surprise. I was feeling very dissatisfied at my work, but I had kind of pushed that dissatisfaction away. I needed to just keep working, right? I needed to stay with my job. It was very important. There were things about it I really loved, so I focused on those things and not the things I was dissatisfied with. However, there was this dream that was pulling at my attention. This dream of making my work, my livelihood, where I devoted my attention to practices and to ways of being that I had been learning for myself over the years, and to create a space where I could lead people through those types of experiences. I was beginning to dream of Heartscapes, although it wasn't named that yet at the time. But it felt impossible. It felt like that world that is just fantasy, right? Just that dream life. And then the unexpected transition happened because I was laid off from that job at the university. I had some sense that this was coming. The university was in a lot of transition itself. Many, many people were getting laid off. Ultimately, that university was folded into another school and changed completely. But during this time, they were kind of trying to keep the ship afloat, and a lot of people lost their jobs during that time, unfortunately. But I found myself now in this liminal space. I was no longer going to be an employee of this university, but I did not yet have a business that I could step into. However, I did have the softness, I had the security of a little bit of unemployment, a few months of unemployment that could help soften that transition. And so things began to be revealed as the light started coming up over the mountains and shining little tendrils of brightness into my work life. I began to really see those places of dissatisfaction. I began to really see the parts of that job that didn't work for me. At the time, I was actively applying to other university jobs. That was the natural, normal thing to do, right? Go try to get another job similar to the one I've been doing for so many years. But this transition time was shining a light on the things about that work that really did not work for me, that didn't align with who I am and what my skills are and what I wanted to be doing. So that soft reveal was happening, right? I was still, seeing the parts that I liked, but I was starting to get that soft reveal. And because it was soft and it wasn't, full daylight of seeing, my future work life in clarity, there was this opportunity for my imagination to come into play. I had this time, this liminal space, this dawn time, where I could imagine a different form of work life. I could start to imagine working from home, for example. I could start to imagine what that would mean for my family life, which connects to a different transition we'll talk about in a minute. I could start to imagine what it would be like to create my own programming rather than running programming designed by other people. And that dream, right, that dream that eventually would become Heartscapes was coming out of the space of pure dream. It wasn't yet fully formed in reality, but it was in that liminal space of being able to feel it with more tangibility, to see the tendrils of it coming into my waking life in ways that I hadn't seen before. So that was a dawn time for me, right? There was this transition that I wasn't expecting that moved me from night into day, that moved me from dreaming into waking. But during that transition, those few months when I had the support of unemployment, so I didn't have to get back to work immediately, I was able to just be in the discomfort of not knowing what my future was going to hold as far as my work life, to navigate that discomfort such that I could dream and I could imagine and I could think about a different path. And ultimately, I could put the pieces in place to open that path. That's the path that I'm on now. I'm still figuring it out, still trying to figure out how to make it, fully robust and support me in the ways that I need to. But I am so grateful for that dawn time when I had those moments of being able to see the dream get revealed, see the reality get revealed softly in those beautiful tendrils of daylight that started to come in. So, what does the dawn teach us about difficult transitions in our life? To recap, the dawn reveals things to us. It begins to reveal things that had been in the dark that we couldn't see before. But they're not yet fully in the brightness of day. They haven't yet become mundane. They're still a little bit mysterious. And so they capture our attention, activate our imagination. The dawn teaches us to bring our dreams into reality, to be in that alchemy between dreaming and waking, and to think about that as real life. Right? That our dreams reveal something about our real life that we miss if we zoom through this dawn time. So, taking those lessons with us, let's head over to this little stream and see what we can learn from the transition space, the liminal space between the meadow and the stream. Okay, so walking into this beautiful meadow, you can see that it is very marshy. This beautiful meadow is receiving lots of snowmelt at this season as we're transitioning from winter into spring. This whole meadow is really more of a marsh at the moment, and it's become quite muddy with lots of little rivulets all moving down from the mountains towards the larger creek across the road. And so what we have is little environments that don't exist here all year. They're only here during this season. These small little ponds that form these little rivers that come as the snow melts, and then as the heat of summer comes, they dry up and this becomes more of a regular meadow. So in the transition between winter and spring, we end up with all of these little liminal spaces where we're transitioning from meadow to stream and further down to river. Let's take a look at some of the things that we can see here. So oftentimes in natural liminal spaces, we end up with life forms that only exist in that liminal space. There's mosses here on the edge that don't exist inside of the flowing water and don't exist out in the meadow. They only exist right here in this in-between space. If we could look much, much closer, we would see insect life, bacterial life, other plant life that only exists right here, and that only exists for this time. And then because there's this influx of water, of resource, that is not here year-round, this becomes an opportunity, a resource for the life forms in this area that's not always here. So there's opportunities that arise for life to thrive in this time, in this place, in ways that are more challenging in other times. At the same time, a sudden influx of lots and lots of water in a place that's not accustomed to it has its challenges, right? This kind of influx of water in a place that normally doesn't have it can really impact the life here negatively, at least for a period of time. And so again, we don't want to gloss over the difficulty of transition, right? There are things that die when these little floods come through the landscape. There are other things that thrive. And ultimately, the water that comes through this landscape at this time nourishes the land in ways that allows the whole ecosystem to thrive over time, even though certain lives will have a very difficult time during this transition. So earlier I referenced the transition in my life after my marriage ended to transitioning to single motherhood. And that's the transition that really came to mind when I observed this liminal space between the meadow and the river. Because in that time, I felt I felt like my resources had shrunk, right? Because there was this other person who was the person who mainly took care of the household. I was the one who went to work. I had a far commute. And my daughter was in daycare, but my ex would kind of navigate with her for most of her transitional needs and would take care of the house. So all of a sudden there was all of this responsibility that I had not had to navigate before, that I had to figure out all by myself. And that was really scary and it was really hard. And I didn't want to be in that liminal space at all. I wanted to be on the other side of it, well-resourced, thriving, having all my systems in place, having it all worked out. But that was going to take a while. And I am not, a systems person, right? I'm not a very organized person. It takes a lot of effort for me to kind of put in place systems and structures to support things. And so I, had done some of that work prior to making the decision to end the relationship, but there was quite a bit of liminal space to be had. So what did I have to do? I had to look for opportunities. I had to look for life. And I had to look for helpers that I didn't have to look for before. There's this beautiful quote from Mr. Rogers that circulates around, especially when really hard times are happening in the world. And that is, when there's a disaster, there's something really hard happening, look for the helpers. Look for the people who are willing and able to help, who can step up and do that. The difference is that when there's a big disaster, it's obvious, right? People will naturally step up into that role of helping. When the disaster is kind of in a private space of your own life, and I really tried to keep this private for a long time. I was really embarrassed about a lot of the things that had been going on, and I just kind of felt like a failure, and there was a lot of stuff about that I had to work through that I have a lot more insight and appreciation for now. But at the time, I was really feeling the failure of it, and I didn't want to ask for help. I didn't want to tell people I was struggling. So that made things harder, right? I made it harder on myself because I hadn't grown my capacity to ask for help and to receive help, right? I had been that kind of I can do it all myself sort of person. And so in that liminal space, I had to grow that capacity, right? This was an opportunity that was presented to me. It didn't feel like an opportunity at the time, but it absolutely was. It was the opportunity to grow in my capacity to ask for help, grow in my capacity to manage my time, to build systems and structures that I didn't have before, to grow in my capacity to being creative and how I was going to fill the different needs, right? It was at that time that I started asking my boss if I could work from home sometimes, because that was just how I was going to make it work. I wouldn't have asked that question if I hadn't been put in that discomfort, if I hadn't been in that liminal space. I asked for help with my kiddo. I asked for, I asked my daycare provider if she would be willing to be flexible about the hours. And, we worked out a system that worked for both of us that I wouldn't have thought to ask her before. I wouldn't have thought to ask her to change the way that she did things, but she was happy to do that. She was able to do that. I asked for help from all kinds of people to just navigate all kinds of things. And as I was more open about the liminal space I was in and the discomfort and the difficulty I was in, those helpers began to show up. They began to show themselves more readily. And not everybody that I would have wanted to step up in the ways that I would have wanted them to chose to do that. That was painful. It was disappointing to see that certain people kind of receded and didn't, show up for me in the ways that I would have wanted to. So that was a really painful part of that transition. Also, in a sense, an opportunity to see things clearly, right? To have a dawn moment in some of those relationships where things get revealed that I hadn't seen before, right? An opportunity to kind of clean house, if you will, right? An opportunity to clear out things in my life that actually weren't supportive. And I wouldn't have necessarily known that they weren't fully supportive if I wasn't in this place where I needed so much support in a way that was new and unusual. So what the river teaches us, what that transition space between the river or the stream and the meadow, is to look for opportunity, look for life, look for the life that is only there in that transition. There were people who showed up in that time to help me that I didn't know and that I don't know now, right? There was help that showed up just in that transition when I needed it. That wasn't part of my day-to-day life, right? So again, the life forms that will exist in a transition space that don't exist on either side of it. Look for those things. Look for the opportunity to grow your skills and your capacities because of the pressure that you're under, right? And look for the helpers. Look for the opportunities that have been created because of that transition. And because I can't help myself, we have to circle it back around to Reiki, because we need to be able to get ourselves grounded, and we need to be able to make more space inside, and we need to be able to feel fundamentally safe inside of ourselves, and we need to feel connected to ourselves and our communities in order to do any of that. right? We need to really be able to come to a grounded, supported place in order to even ask for that help, or to look for those opportunities, or to see those places to grow as an opportunity instead of just more shit that is being piled on our life, right? So we want to really, one of the opportunities that's there and absolutely was alive for me during that time was to find those practices, find those, you know, habits, find those, juicy things that we can introduce into our life. Reiki was one of them. Soul collage was one of them, that increase our ability to do any of these things that I'm talking about, to be in this discomfort, to be in this transition. And once we are able to get ourselves to that grounded place, that spacious and connected place, then we really can see the opportunities, see the life that is present, and to see the helpers that appear seemingly out of thin air when that transition is occurring. Okay, one more for today. There's so many more lessons that nature has for us about transitions, but we're going to stick with one more today. And that is what we can learn from the transition between sunny places and shady places. Let's go take a look. So there is this absolutely gorgeous oak here, one of many on this land, not yet leafed out, so still feeling pretty solidly in winter, even as spring is starting to knock on the door. And as we see down here at her feet, we have this beautiful shadow that she is casting. Let's go take a closer look. So we have the sun and we have the shade, and we have this liminal space in between. Now this can really be seen when you're on the edge of a forest or something dense. Here we're just in the shade of this one beautiful tree. But we can still see that this liminal space has some characteristics. Firstly, it's soft. You see how soft the edge is of that shadow between the sun and the shade. It's a soft and gentle edge. Also, it is not straight. These shadows are non-linear. They're organic in shape. They move as the wind moves the trees and as the sun moves across the sky, changes the position of the shade. It is a soft and ever-changing, non-static space. You also have a slightly different temperature in that space. You don't have the sharp heat of the direct sun, and you don't have the chill of the deep shadow. So right there at that edge, you have that sweet spot of temperature where you get a little bit of shade, but you still have a little bit of sun filtering in. The two of them are coexisting in that edge space in a way that doesn't exist when you're on either side of that edge. So you have softness, you have non-linearity, you have curvy organic spaces, you have slow change, and you have this softness of the temperature. So what does that teach us? Or what does that offer to us in our times of liminal transition? What came up for me so strongly when I thought about this one was experiences of the transition of grief. When we've experienced some form of loss, whether it is a death or the ending of a relationship or moving away from a place that we love, whatever that transition that came from a loss, it can be so, so painful. It can feel so stark, right? It can feel so much like we're either in the blazing, overwhelming sun or we're in the deep, deep, rigid shadows, right? That we're cold and frigid and bound up, or maybe we're overheated, we're sweating and we're angry, right? Our emotions can feel like that. When we're in grief, there can be this wild swing between our emotional states, between our experiences. We might have a place that we go to more readily, but oftentimes grief is characterized by quite a bit of wild variation in our emotional states. We can swing from being numbed out, right, cold, deep in the shadows, and then we can be enraged, right, full of anger in the hot sun. And so all of that can be normal. And there are things that we can do to help be inside of that transition, help be inside of that space of grief in ways that nourish us and sustain us even inside of that challenging time. Because we can't bypass grief. At least we can't bypass grief in a way that doesn't harm us ultimately, right? Because if we're grieving, it's because we loved something and we lost it. And if we shut ourselves off to grief, then we shut ourselves off to love and to connection and to joy. There's a lot we could say about that. I've probably made other videos about that. There's greater thinkers than I that have talked a lot about that connection between grief and love and joy. And so it's really important that we find ways to be in the liminality of grief, to let ourselves feel it and be in it. And all of the other lessons that we've talked about today absolutely come to bear here, right? Looking for the helpers, looking for life, asking for help, building our capacities, seeing the things that are being revealed by our grief that we didn't see before when we were not in it, letting our imagination support us and working through that. All of that absolutely applies and is helpful. But where I want to focus when we think about the liminal space between the shady places and the sunny places is that softness, is that curvilinear line. First, the softness. We gotta give ourselves softness when we're dealing with these griefs. That includes giving ourselves compassion and understanding, right? Understanding that we're gonna have these really difficult feelings, that we're gonna maybe not be understood by everybody, right? But giving ourselves softness and care and compassion and tenderness, maybe asking other people to help us with that, maybe going to professionals to help us with that, whether that's a therapist or a massage therapist who can help to just soften the tension in our bodies and in our hearts and our minds. Giving ourselves tenderness, whatever care looks like to you, right? Healthy, appropriate care that doesn't turn into self-destruction, right? But those soft, gentle, life-giving places, when we have the wherewithal to give them to ourselves, to not resist loving ourselves and doing things that feel good because we are grieving. There's an odd feeling of guilt that can happen when we're grieving, when we've lost something or when somebody else has lost something. That tells us that we're not supposed to feel good, right? We're not allowed to feel good. We have to just be in the hard place, right? We owe it to the person that we've lost or the thing that has changed to suffer. And I'm here to tell you, friend, that is not true, right? We owe it to those losses and to ourselves to thrive even as we grieve. And so any time that we can give ourselves some care, some tenderness, some softness, we can seek that from another person. We can receive it from another person who's trying to offer it to us, right? Sometimes we resist those offers. No, I need to just be in this, right? But maybe we can turn towards those offers and receive them. Receive that gentleness, that softness. Now, non-linearity, curvilinear spaces. Grief is not linear. Transitions are not linear. Job changes are not linear. Moving to a new house is not linear. Going through a divorce is not linear. Retiring is not linear. There might be certain logistical steps that have a certain predictable linear nature to them, but even the logistics are often not linear. There's things that change. There's things that have to pivot, things that we have to adjust to as we go along. And that is especially true of our internal experience. And if we're talking about grief, this is 100% true. Grief is not linear. It curves, it swirls, it doubles back on itself, it spirals around, it moves forward for great strides and then turns back around and comes back to the beginning. It's curvy. And that's okay. That's natural, right? Eventually, we move around the fullness of the shape. And when we're in those moments that feel like backsliding, like we've turned back around and we've spiraled back into something we thought that we left behind, that can feel really dark. It can feel like failure. It can feel like, what am I even trying to heal this for if I'm just going to end up right back here? So it can be really, really helpful to remember that grief is not linear, that nature is not linear, that the beautiful organic lines of the shadow of this great tree move and curve and double back on themselves and spiral, and yet somehow form a fullness, a completeness. And here in this late winter time, we can really see that because she hasn't leafed out yet. So we can really see the contours of this beautiful, beautiful non-linear line, this soft and curvy and tender line that is moving all the time as the sun shifts. And so when we are in times of transition, especially when those transitions involve grief, I urge us to remember the shape of that beautiful tree and that beautiful shadow, to remember to give ourselves softness, to receive tenderness when it's offered, to seek out those opportunities for care, for softness, and to recognize that in those moments when we feel like we've doubled back on ourselves and we've regressed, that these are not failures. This is not backsliding. This is normal progression through the world. This is natural progression through our experiences. Remember the beautiful shape of that shadow and feel inside of yourself the way that you have the capacity to move all around the edge of that whole shape, to come all the way back to the heart of that tree, to that grounded, rooted place at her roots, to remember the firm ground that supports you, those beautiful rooted places that are nourished by the ground, to remember the wide open, spacious reach that you have as you reach yourself up and out and into the world, supported by that firm foundation. And to remember your connected, beautiful heart, feeling yourself to be part of this wide open life that we have, this wide open space, this wide open world of which you are an intricate part. Just like this little friend here, this little birdie going about her day in the liminal spaces, moving through her transitions, finding nourishment and resources along the way. Hi, little friend. Thank you so much for joining us on this video today. Okay, friends, that's what I've got for you today. I hope there was something in there that was helpful, something that resonated, something that helped you feel a little bit more spacious in the transitions that you find yourself in. I'd love to hear what, if anything, of this resonated with you. Are there other examples from nature that you can think of that can help inform the way that we work with transition? Anything about transitions that you've experienced in your life that you have grown from, that you have found yourself on the other side a little bit more capable than when you entered? And friends, as you go throughout your day, as you go in and out of the liminal spaces of your life, may you be deeply, deeply provisioned for those times. All right, it's just about time for me to head down the hill and teach a soul collage class here at this beautiful space. Thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, I love you. Bye.